Are there any questions arising from either of those presentations? We've got a short Q&A. Yes.
Hi, Ron. Michael, is the age limit in Australia's courts a form of discrimination?
I don't think so, and I don't think so because the office of a federal judge, to which the provision applies, is a public office. Politicians are subject to voting, and no one has contested the ultimate right of public servants to be subject to a provision for retirement. The public offices, like the judiciary, and in particular the High Court of Australia, are offices of public service and public trust. And it is important that the judges of the courts, especially the highest courts, should be turned over. I mean, look at the world we're living in. I get on the first train every morning. Everybody in the train is looking at a mobile phone. That wasn't there 10 years ago. And a whole generation now is living in cyberspace and their brains are an extension. That's just an absolutely different world than the world in which older judges have lived. And the values of older people are going to be different from younger people. So you've got to find a way to turn them out after a while. And my own life is an illustration that if you put your mind to it and you work at it, there are plenty of things, useful things in society you can do, and you have a time to serve and then you move on. So it's different in ordinary employment and different in other public employment, but I think the decision of Parliament to retire judges in Australia at a maximum of 70 is a fair provision. So the strict answer to your question is, yes, it is discriminatory, but there is a reason for it, and it's justified. That's at least my opinion. Don't know what you think, Ron.
Well, I agree with you, but can I tell you all the story? It actually came in a constitutional amendment in 1977, where it was felt that perhaps rather than having judges for life, we have a statutory retirement age, known amongst judges as statutory senility, and that Michael gave all the reasons for. Well, I was of voting age in 1977. I was a young academic, and I thought, oh, of course, these people are old. 70, God, of course they should retire. Now that I'm about to turn 70 in 2 weeks, I realise how young they were.
There'd always be plenty for you to do, Ron.
Very good. Yes, there's a lady here in red.
Thank you. Michael, the only issue I would have with you there is Ruth Ginsburg, who is now 90, and I saw her film recently, the most magnificent judge who is determined to remain on the Supreme Court in America because of her views, and she's gone steadily from being in the centre to now right over to the left because of the range of judges. Now, I know that there are male judges who perhaps ought not to be there, but certainly I would want Ruth Ginsburg there, and American women want her there for a long time. I think she's 90.
Yes, I don't think she's quite 90, but I'm too discreet to mention what I think her age is. As it happens, I got a letter from Ruth yesterday. We are old friends. We've known each other since 1988. And she sent me an item where her granddaughter had prepared something. Apparently she appears in the film. I do think Ruth is getting a little carried away with the celebrity of her film, but she is a magnificent person, and you know, modesty requires me not to say too much about this, but had I remained on the High Court of Australia, I would have been brilliant for the last 10 years and maybe another 10 years to come. But you've got to make these decisions on broader issues. You can't just make them on one particular magnificent judge. For example, at the moment, the High Court of Australia seems to be inordinately proud of the fact that they have a level of unanimity which is something like 89% unanimous in all cases. Well, one of the good things the British gave us was the right of judges in appellate courts to dissent. That is not available in most countries of the world, but it is available in our tradition. And actually, it's an inbuilt mechanism for updating and modernising the law. So I don't think 89% everyone agreeing with everyone is necessarily a good thing. I think it's, in a free country, it's important to have different voices where that's warranted. And so had I been there, I possibly would have been a different voice. And maybe my sexuality, or if you're Islamic, your religion, or if you're disabled, your disability. Maybe that gives you another take on life, and you see things through other people's eyes, and it makes you sensitive to injustice that other people are blind to. After all, we were terribly blind to the Aboriginal injustice of denying their land rights. For 200 years we denied it, and it wasn't fixed up by Parliament. It was fixed up by a decision of the High Court of Australia in Mabo. Don't forget that next time you hear people say, we don't need a Bill of Rights in Australia because Parliament will always fix things up. Parliament will fix things up that suit the majority, but not always protect minorities. And that's why you need mechanisms to do that.
I think we have time for another question in the front row here. Yes?
Michael Kirby, how is it possible in a public school for a religious group such as you mentioned to have the right to voice such damaging fundamentalist views?
Well, it's possible because since 1880 in New South Wales, we had a compromise. Before that, most schools were religious schools. And then when Parkes and the other colonial leaders discovered the idea of public schools, which spread right across this continent. We were the first continent in the world that had public schools across the continent. And a very good thing, in my opinion, it is too. But how did it happen? Well, a compromise was then struck for the Public Instruction Act that allowed one period a week to be allowed for people to come in from churches, all religions, to give religious instruction. And when I was at school, I went to the Anglican religious instruction, and there was nothing about hate for others. I never, ever, ever heard anything about hating Islamic people, and I never heard anything about hating gay people. It was about the fundamental lessons of religion. And I think that's what most of the religious instruction is about. But unfortunately, this slipped through the net, and it was discovered not by the Education Department, but by the Sydney Morning Herald. They found it on their website. They then asked, did they teach in any public schools? And they do. And then they took them to task. So a vigilant press protected us. So the answer is, how did it do it? Well, it's the compromise of 1880, and it's in there. A lot of people don't agree with it. More and more parents now are saying, I don't want to have any religious instruction in a public school. I'll look after that in my own time.
It is possible to opt out, but I'm just wondering, there is no supervision within the school as to what particular people are coming in?
No, well, there is supervision about who come in. I think they've got to either be an ordained or authorised person of a particular religion, or they've got to do a course in secular ethics, which is available in New South Wales, and increasing numbers of parents are opting for secular ethics, so that there isn't a religious component in the religious instruction or in Scripture.
Thank you very much. There is one final question from the gentleman in the front row. Thank you.
Emeritus Professor Rifat Abeid at Sydney University. First of all, I would like to thank very much our both speakers for a very insightful, very informative, fascinating talk. I have devoted the last decade of my academic journey to searching and researching Jewish, Muslim, and Christian relations. To this end, I, with a colleague, an Anglican priest who was secretary to the Archbishop of Canterbury, turned academic, who knows Islam like the back of his hand. We have written 3 voluminous books about these relations. Since 850 until the present day, we have been working on this. None of the heavenly religions, to concur with what Michael and Ron have told us, have ever preached hatred against another religion. Michael, I fully much concur with your what you said to us about what happened in the prestigious Senate of Australia yesterday. I join my voice with you in condemning that sort of thought and talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and I appreciate what you've said in the lead up to the question. But I have to say that many people in this country ask themselves, why are there not strong condemnations of what happened in Kabul? And why do we not hear condemnations of these things? And until it may have something to do with the organisation of Islam, which I understand is rather like the Presbyterians or the Congregationalists in Christianity. It's not a big organisation with a hierarchy going up to a pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's much more diffuse and, in a sense, more democratic. But we really ought to have voices lifted against what happened yesterday in Kabul. That is not, I cannot believe that that is the instruction of Islam. And I think we need to lift our voices as Australians against Christians when they're nasty to gays and Islamic people when they're nasty to each other, and say this is not the message of a loving God. It cannot be and is not. And I think it would be a very beneficial thing if there were a way that voices could be raised on that, because a lot of people, knowing of their own organisation, look with puzzlement at what they see as the silence that descends when horrible, cruel and violent and awful acts happen, including against gays.
Thank you. Nor can it be the act of a loving God to visit the sins of the fathers on the children, as Professor McCallum spoke about. One message of hope that came out of yesterday's egregious comments in the Senate was the outpouring of those others in our Parliament, in our Senate, who made such heartfelt, beautiful statements condemning those words. So we can all take heart from that our nation won't stand silently and they will raise their voices when these things come up. So I'd like to thank you again, both of you, for those wonderful presentations and discussions. So thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll invite Ahmed. Thank you.